On the 18th of June in 2023, there was an unfortunate submarine implosion caused by the negligence as well as the lack of accountability of safety protocols and regulations hindered innovation. And the outcome of this serves a reminder of another catastrophe ocean voyage due to negligence, the Titanic. Hi, my name is Jessa, and please join me as we look together top 10 disturbing facts about the Titanic you never knew. Also, the riddle I gave in the last video, the answer will be at the end. Number 10. Materials. Humans are capable of creating incredible and monumental things, and with the Titanic, it was Thomas Andrews, a British businessman and shipbuilder responsible of the Titanic. He was the managing director and head of the drafting department of the shipbuilding company located in Belfast, Ireland, as well as the naval architect of the giant ship. In 1907, Andrews began to oversee the plans for the 3 new ocean liners, including the Titanic, with the goal of creating a luxury ship at sea. Although they worked diligently to guarantee the aesthetics of the ship, the materials used, according to the University of Illinois Mechanical Science and Engineering Department, noted that some materials have ductile properties, and this means that they will absorb more energy prior to breaking than materials with brittle properties and will undergo plastic deformations before finally breaking. The Titanic sailed through very cold water, and on the night it sank, the temperatures were just below freezing. Thomas, as well as the other engineers involved in the ship's development, may not have considered effects of temperature change in the material behavior, meaning the steel became more brittle at lower temperatures. A study after retrieving samples of the Titanic infrastructure recognized that the material used was similar to the same materials used in grocery bags. The students who conducted the study in the University of Illinois recognized, as well as the formation base of the ship, that it could have been adjusted to allow water to free flow into the base, which would have reduced the ship's fracturing and would have gave people more time to escape, as well as the collapse of the ship in a physics study also in results in high speed of impact, pressure exert per unit area, as well as the fluid dynamics that contributed to the break. Number 9. Lifeboats. The Titanic carried a total of 20 lifeboats, which, given its size and passenger capacity, proved to be woefully inadequate during the disaster. The ship was designed to accommodate 64 lifeboats, but this number was significantly reduced to enhance the aesthetic appeal of the vessel. Again, as I mentioned, Thomas, he really wanted that look of aesthetic for the Titanic first. As a result, the Titanic only had enough lifeboats to carry about half of its total passengers and crew. The lifeboats on the Titanics had varying capacities, and the largest one capable of only holding about 65 people. However, the ship's inadequate numbers of lifeboats meant that even if they were fully loaded, it still wouldn't be sufficient to rescue all on board. The protocol for loading lifeboats prioritizing women and children, as this policy was enforced during the evacuation with the intention of ensuring the safety of the most vulnerable passenger first. Many of the crew members were not adequately trained for lifeboat operations, leading to delays and difficulties in launching the lifeboats effectively, and because of this, the lifeboats were launched with significantly fewer occupants than their maximum capacity. Contributing to the overall failure to rescue a significant number of people in the chaotic evacuation, there were instances where lifeboats left the sinking ship without being filled to capacity. The results in a situation where passengers and crew members were left behind. Number 8. Communication failures. The communication failures during the sinking of the Titanic 1912 played a significant role in the tragedy. Despite advanced technology for the time, including wireless telegraphy and a series of errors, miscommunication, and misunderstandings contributed to the delay response and rescue efforts. The wireless operators on the Titanic, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, were overloaded with work, and they received a high volume of passenger messages that had been sending routine traffic for most of the evening. This workload contributed to the fatigue and delay response with distress signals, and the wireless operators received several ice warnings from other ships in the area. But these warnings were not promptly relayed to the bridge, and some were not taken as seriously as they should have been. The nearby ships SS Californian actually stopped for the night due to the surrounding ice, and despite seeing distress signals from the Titanic, the Californian wireless operators actually went to bed without relaying the messages to the Titanic or alerting the bridge. Although several ships were in the vicinity of the Titanic, the crew was not fully aware of their proximity. Because of this lack of awareness, delay in the arrival of the rescue ships had contributed to the loss of many lives. Number 7. Safety measures. While the Titanic was considered a technological marvel, a combination of factors including insufficient safety measures contributed to the tragedy. As you know, the lifeboats were deliberately not put up due to aesthetics, and despite knowing the risk of sailing through icy waters with the potential for iceberg encounters, lifeboat drills were not actually conducted regularly. The lack of practice and familiarity with lifeboat procedures contributed to delays and confusion during the evacuation. The ship's lookouts did not have any access to binoculars, which could have potentially aided them in spotting the iceberg sooner, and a pair of binoculars meant for the lookouts were reportedly mistakenly misplaced or locked away, contributing to the lack of advance warning. There was not enough life belts, which is like life jackets, distributed throughout the ship, and some passengers reported difficulty finding them during the evacuation. In the aftermath, the disaster significantly changes were made to intentionally maritime safety regulations, and the tragedy prompted improvements in areas such as number of lifeboats required and mandatory lifeboat drills, and the prioritization of safety over luxury in ship design. Number 6. Overconfident crew. The overconfidence of the crew of the Titanic was a contributing factor to the disaster. The Titanic was famously promoted as unsinkable due to its advanced safety features, including watertight compartments. This perception fostered a sense of invincibility among the crew and the passengers despite receiving multiple warnings about icebergs in the area. The ship maintained a high speed, and the crew, including the captain, Edward J. Smith, did not take sufficient precautions to slow down or alter the ship's course to navigate safely throughout the ice field. The wireless operations received several ice warnings from nearby ships, but again, these warnings were not promptly relayed to the bridge. Some warnings were even downplayed, contributing a lack of urgency in taking preventative measures. Lifeboat drills were again not conducted regularly, and some crew members were unfamiliar actually with the lifeboat procedures. As this lack of preparation contributed to delays and confusion during the evacuation, the watertight compartment systems was believed to also help make the ship seem unsinkable. But as we know, the design had limitations, and the compartments were not tall enough to prevent water from spilling over the top, ultimately leading to the sinking. There was actually a delay in realizing the severity of the situation, initiating the evacuation process, and some passengers and crew members were initially hesitant to abandon the ship, contributing to a slower response. Number 5. Freezing water. The water surrounding the Titanic on the night of its sinking was frigid, as the ship struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The water temperature at the time of the Titanic sinking was around the freezing point or slightly below. North Atlantic in April is also known for extremely cold temperatures, and the water temperature was likely near or below 32 degrees or 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Immersion in such cold water posed an immediate risk for hypothermia, as well for anyone in the water. Hypothermia occurs when the body loses heat more quickly than it can generate, and leading to a dangerous drop in body temperature. In the frigid water, survival time without adequate protection is very limited, and the ability to survive in such conditions depended on factors such as individuals' age, health, and the clothing that they were wearing. For those who were entering the water directly, the shock of the cold water could have had an immediate lethal impact, and cold water immersion can induce gasping, hyperventilation, and a rapid loss of motor control. In addition to hypothermia, the risk of drowning was very significant for those who entered the water without life jackets and other buoyancy aids, and the cold water could impair swimming abilities and increase the likelihood of exhaustion. Number 4. Crew sacrifices. Many crew members of the Titanic demonstrated acts of heroism and self-sacrifice, putting the safety of passengers ahead of their own. Several officers and crew members helped load and launch lifeboats, ensuring that many passengers as possible had the opportunities to escape the sinking ship. The ship's band, led by Wallace Hartley, continued to play music on the deck to calm passengers during the evacuations, and they played until the ship's final moments, providing a sense of comfort amongst the chaos. Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, the wireless operators mentioned earlier, stayed at their posts sending distress signals and hoping for rescue efforts even as the ship sank. Phillips continued to transmit until the power failed, sacrificing his life in the process. Many stewards and crew members assisted passengers, helping them in lifeboats, providing reassurance, and even sacrificing their own chances of survival to ensure safety of others. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell and his team faced perilous conditions in the flooded engine room, striving to maintain power and to slow down the sinking, as well as Captain Edward J. Smith, reported to have also gone down with the ship. His actions in the final moments included ensuring safety to as many passengers as possible, and he did not abandon his post on the bridge. Number 3. Class disparities. The sinking of the Titanic in 1912 highlighted a stark class disparities in terms of access to resources, privileges, and survival opportunities. Like today. The ship's passengers were divided into different classes: first, second, and third. First class passengers enjoyed luxurious accommodations. They had the most comfortable and well-appointed areas of the ship. Second class passengers, as well as third, had more modest accommodations. As for third, specifically, they had the most basics. Their cabins were located at the lower part of the ship, where most of the casualties occurred, as there were many immigrants that were left at risk during the flooding of the ship. Third class passengers, especially men, had a lower survival rate. Social norms and practices of the time influenced behavior during the evacuation, and the women and children first policy was generally applied more to the first class passengers. The class system of the Titanic reflected broader economic disparities of the early 20th century. First class passengers were often wealthy individuals, while many in the third class passengers were immigrants just seeking refuge in America. Number 2. Number lives lost. Out of the estimated 2,224 passengers and crew on board, approximately 1,517 people lost their lives in the disaster. The exact number of casualties is still difficult to determine precisely due to discrepancies in the passengers and crew lists, as well as incomplete nature of historical records. Those who died, aside the crew and captain mentioned earlier, include Melvina Dean's father, who she is considered as the last living survivor of the sinking of the Titanic. At 2 months old, she was also the youngest passenger aboard, and the Deans were not supposed to be on board on the Titanic, but due to a coal strike, they were actually transferred into it and boarded as third-class passengers. Dean was 9 weeks old when she boarded the ship, and her father felt the collision with the iceberg on that night. And after investigating, he turned to his cabin, told his wife to get dressed with the kids and go back on deck. Dean, like her mother and her brother, were placed on the lifeboat 10 as her father did not survive, and his body, if ever recovered, was never identified. Keep in mind the amount who did die on the Titanic, majority of them were third class, and 709 of these third class passengers did not make it. Finally, number 1, survival's guilt. Survival's guilt is a psychological phenomenon that occurs when an individual who has survived a traumatic event, such as a disaster or accident, experiences feelings of guilt or remorse for having to survive while other people didn't. In some cases, family members were separated during the evacuations, and survivors who reunited with their families experienced guilt and sorrow for those who did not have the same outcome. There were societal expectations and stigmas associated with survival, as some survivors felt a need of shame or judgment from others who questioned their actions or perceived lack of heroism during the evacuation. Survivors like Masabumi Honsono was a Japanese civil servant and actually survived the sinking of the Titanic, but he found himself condemned and ostracized by the Japanese public as well as the Japanese government because of the misconception that he decided to save himself then go down on the ship. In a memoir, he writes, "Our lifeboat too was filled with sobbing, weeping children and women worried about the safety of their husbands and fathers, and I too was as much depressed and miserable as they were, not knowing what would become of myself in the long run." Sadly, those who survived the disaster would succumb to self-infliction due to the point of taking their own life, like Frederick Fleet and Jack Thayer, who took their own lives. Frederick was a sailor and crewman, and he felt immense guilt that he was able to escape, while his colleagues, as well as many other passengers, could not. The sinking of the Titanic in 1912 had profound and lasting impacts on maritime safety, emergency procedures, and social awareness. The disaster prompted numerous lessons and changes in various aspects of ship design, operation, as well as responses to emergencies. Unfortunately, events like shipwrecks still happen, although very rarely, like the OceanGate Titan was left with an unfortunate end. Well, that's all for today. In the last video I was in, I gave you guys a riddle. The riddle was, what is something that you have but you cannot touch? You can change whatever you want and you use every day, but you've never seen me. What am I? The answer is, you're mine. Your next riddle is, I stick so strongly yet I am not sticky in the stylus. What am I? The answer will be in the next video. Top 10 Gobelki Tepe facts not told in textbooks. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me. My name is Jessa. Be sure to like and subscribe and try something new today. Bye!